All right, we're back now with the Massachusetts State Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr as we end one year and begin another, and so is true for the legislative session. Senator, welcome back. What's going on this beautiful, dark, dreary, dank Tuesday?
Well, Rick, we can't complain too much because we've had some pretty good weather over the last couple of weeks. But, you know, today's a little bit dreary, but it doesn't matter here because state government has to continue operating, and we are in the last day of the legislative session right now. And we are in informal session still because formal sessions ended at the end of July, but we are still trying to move pieces of legislation. And most of those are home rule petitions, local matters where the city or town needs to have our approval to do something, whether that be to issue a liquor license or to change a piece of zoning or to change its charter. And we're trying to move through those right now and get as many done as we can before the session ends. And then tomorrow, we will convene sometime around 11 o'clock, maybe as late as noon, and we will establish the next general court. So we will convene the new legislative session. So it's a really busy time right now on Beacon Hill as we try to move through all of these bills.
Let me ask you something as a layperson. Why the rush? Why does it all have to be done as one session ends before the next one begins? Tell me the mechanics of that, please.
Well, there's a couple of different answers to that. The first is that bills expire at the end of the second year of a legislative session. So bills are filed in what we consider a legislative session, which is 2 years. That is ending today, tonight, whenever this gavel ultimately drops to end the session. And then we start again tomorrow. So the bills all have to be done now, or they have to be refiled and start the entire legislative process again of being admitted, of having a public hearing, of being reported from the committee. So that's one answer to the question. But the other answer to the question is, it doesn't have to be this way. And sometimes that gets very frustrating. There's times during the year where I think we could be moving more expeditiously on a number of these matters rather than waiting for them to accumulate at the end of the session. But you know, Rick, you used to be a teacher and a very good one at that. And you know the old maxim about folks not doing the term paper till the night before it's due. And that's also part of it. You know, there's a bit of human nature here where things sometimes have to wait until the very last minute. I work constantly trying to prevent that from happening. And in the new rules that hopefully we'll adopt in the new session, we'll be undertaking some more reforms to make it even less likely to happen.
What's the status of the bill that you were promoting last when we talked about catalytic converters?
So that bill is actually moving. It's one of the few substantive bills and policy-related bills rather than a home rule petition that I think is going to have the chance to pass. It's gotten preliminary approval from the House. It's gotten preliminary approval from the Senate. So it's moving back and forth. And over the next several hours, I'm hoping we'll be able to complete all the procedural steps to get it to the governor's desk. So that's one on which I'm very optimistic at this point.
All right. And I read something, I think, in the Globe about, God forgive me for saying this phrase, revenge porn.
That's the name that's commonly used for the bill, Rick, and there's a more technical term for it, but I think that's how most people understand the bill, by that name. And it, too, is one of the final policy matters that I think we are going to be able to address. And it's important that we address it because we've heard a lot of testimony from victims all over the state about how the dissemination of these kind of images has had a devastating impact on their lives. But it's important to remember, Rick, that the bill is more comprehensive than that. So it does create the criminal offense of distributing images of indecent material. But it also creates a diversion program for young folks that are convicted of that or at least charged with that so that they don't necessarily enter the criminal justice system. It requires the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to develop guidelines on the use of social media so that students have an increased awareness about what the impact of what they put into social media can be. And so there are a number of different safeguards that are included in the bill. But at the end of the day, there also would be a new crime, and that crime would carry a penalty of up to 2.5 years of imprisonment or a $10,000 fine. So it's a serious offense as contemplated by this bill. And you may remember that the governor has filed this bill consistently and did so quite a while ago, and it is finally seeing a path to passage after a lot of changes, a lot of discussion. That's the way the legislative process works. And with regard to this bill, it seems like, and again, nothing's 100% certain, but it seems like that process is going to produce results late this afternoon or tonight.
What signifies the end of one session and the beginning of the next?
So adjournment. So when this session ends, both the House and the Senate will need to adjourn. And they adjourn, to use the Latin term that we would use, sine die, which means without another day. So it's final adjournment for the session. And that's done independently by the House and the Senate. And that's a judgment call in terms of when it ends. But it has to end before the new session convenes, when we reconvene tomorrow in formal session. One other interesting thing that's happening here, Rick, is that we also have a change in administration. And so tomorrow, late in the afternoon, Governor Baker is scheduled to take what is called the Lone Walk. So it's a tradition in Massachusetts that the governor leaves the office by him or herself and walks alone out to the front steps. And in the days when this started, it all started because a particular governor was incredibly unpopular, Benjamin Butler, and no one would be seen with him. And so he left the office alone. And in testament to that day, ever since then, governors leave by themselves. And so that's scheduled, I believe, to take place around 4 p.m. tomorrow. But unlike when Benjamin Butler took that lonely walk, there will be thousands of people here, and there'll be a rope line set up, and folks will watch and participate along the sidelines while the governor walks down the halls by himself.
Well, his popularity is amazing in the state, and it on the one hand is sad to see him go, and on the other hand, it's great to see him take the next step. And we've talked privately about what his future could hold, and we're both very hopeful about that, as we are on different sides of the aisle, as it were, sometimes. Let me ask you, Senator, you're good friends with Governor Baker, who is from the North Shore, but you're also good friends with Kim Driscoll, the incoming lieutenant governor, who's also from the North Shore. Do the opposing parties participate in inaugural activity celebrations?
So they do. So the governor and lieutenant governor will be sworn in the day after we are. So we're sworn in tomorrow, and the governor and lieutenant governor will be sworn in on Thursday. Legislators from both parties will attend that swearing in, and will attend some of the festivities surrounding it. This is a time where we are celebrating the transition to a new administration, and it's in our best interest, all of us, for that new administration to succeed. And we have to have a working relationship with each other. That is something that we all work very hard at. So there is bipartisan participation in the events that are happening. In fact, before Governor Baker takes that lone walk tomorrow, he will be meeting with the folks that are usually at the leadership meetings every week. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, I will be there, my counterpart in the House, and we will all have a few last conversations with the governor before he leaves his office. And then as the governor and lieutenant governor are sworn in on Thursday, we will all be present. So there is some continuity of that. And one of the things that I'm proudest about in my service in state government is that there is a quantum of bipartisanship that distinguishes us from other parts of the country and from our federal government.
I know you're in the middle of a session here and you got to get back, but you mentioned many times, as we've discussed, about seeing people personal, being up close and personal, meeting with people. And it's interesting to me that Lieutenant Governor-elect Driscoll touted that very same thing about Lieutenant Governor Polito. In fact, and you mentioned this several times, that she has visited every single city and town in Massachusetts. And it seems like the model that one administration is passing on to another is something that has got some real solidarity, it would seem, no matter what party you're from.
There's no doubt about that, and I think that Charlie Baker has given us, and Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito have given us a shining example of how to work collaboratively. And I think that certainly incoming Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll are very much appreciative of that model, and I expect that they will continue it.
Well, that's a proud moment, I think, in Massachusetts politics and history. Senator, as we close out 2022 and we enter 2023, what do you see on the horizon finally here? What are you optimistic about?
Well, I'm optimistic about the fact that we continue to have a solid financial foundation in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our tax returns continue to be strong. That gives us the flexibility not only to invest in important priorities, but also the ability to return some of those tax dollars to the people who pay them in the first place and help them cope with the high cost of living that's being occasioned by inflation. I'm optimistic that we are going to continue to be the leader in the nation with regard to energy conservation and alternative energy and carbon emissions reduction. I'm optimistic, most of all, about the fact that we continue to be able to pursue a bipartisan model of decision-making, which is collaborative and inclusive, and regardless of the issues, that will serve us well as we move ahead, even as we close another chapter of operating in that way in these next couple of days.